Yes, hi. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about inter-application vulnerabilities. We are going to focus most on the web applications. However, I believe that several concepts which I will share here will be also applicable to all other types of applications that you can imagine. So again, my name is Marcin Szydłowski. I'm using handle security KSL. I'm not like super active on Twitter, but posting there some content from time to time, so you can follow me, whatever. Table of contents, so we'll start with the introduction. So we'll just briefly explain why I'm here. Then we'll jump into inter-application vulnerabilities. So this phrase, inter-application vulnerability, is not a well-known phrase, so I will explain what is the, let's say, what are these inter-application vulnerabilities and where you can find them. Then we'll jump directly to a couple of real-life examples which were identified during bug bounty hunting, independent one. And because I believe that each presentation should end with some takeaway, with something that you can take away from it and use right away during your own research, I will share some things which you may find useful later on. So a little bit about myself. So as I already mentioned, my name is Marcin Szydłowski. I used to work as a cybersecurity consultant doing web application penetration testing, infrastructure penetration testing, some red teaming, and so on. I did that for 5 years or something. Currently, I'm responsible for secure system deployment in a quite huge global company. Apart from that, I'm an independent bug bounty hunter, member of Synack red team, so one of the bug bounty platforms. And also I participate in some independent bug bounty programs which are not, let's say, listed on these private bug bounty platforms. So for example, I was participating in Hack the Pentagon, or United Airlines bug bounty, or some bug bounties for of major international banks. Why this slide is important? Because I believe that the entire research would not happen if not the, let's say, the perspective which I was able to develop by working on the both ends. So I was able to work as a guy from the offensive perspective, and now working on the defensive end, I'm able to spot some, let's say, weak areas in the software testing and software development processes, which later on might be used right away to find some decent vulnerabilities. So why hunting for bugs in secure applications? So I changed the company recently, what resulted in a change in my contract terms. So because of that, from, let's say, 1.5 years, I'm able to participate in different bug bounty programs. I'm able to participate in them regularly and, let's say, spend a little bit more time on that. Regularly doesn't mean full-time because, as I mentioned, it's not my full-time job. And what is more, it's not even my part-time job because, to be honest, I'm spending like, I don't know, maybe a couple of hours per week on that. It's also hard to maintain, let's say, a regular level of time spent on that. So sometimes I'm just looking for some bugs for, I don't know, 10 hours per week, and sometimes I'm not hunting for any vulnerabilities for this couple of weeks. So because of that, there is a need to, let's say, to come up with some, let's say, methodology of hunting for bugs. I believe that every bug bounty hunter do that, because there is a dark side of bug bounty programs that probably a lot of you, maybe you're not aware of, or maybe there is a lot of information about that. Because most of the time when you're hearing about bug bounty programs, you hear about, like payouts, I don't know, 10K US dollars or 15K US dollars, or, people just writing some posts, what they did and what they found. The thing is that I believe that majority of people who spend a lot of time on bug bounty programs are not even getting paid for that because of the duplicates. So because the information about vulnerabilities reported by our other researchers is not publicly available, and also because of the fact that some of the bug bounty programs are in the market for, let's say, like 5 years or something, so it's really hard to find any new vulnerabilities. So basically, it results in a fact that a lot of people spend a lot of time on just, creating these reports for bug bounty program, looking for bugs in the applications, and in the end, they end up with nothing. So basically, there is this simple problem statement. So how actually can we find unique vulnerabilities in web application of companies which are security mature? Because most of the times, companies which run these bug bounty programs, there are companies whose applications are publicly available. They were probably assessed by many independent parties at least a couple of times, but it's still possible to find some vulnerabilities. So that's, let's say, the problem statement that we need to solve, and I would like to show you the methodology that basically I think it's valid for this one. So quick intro to this one as well. So usually, while I was pen testing applications back in the days, when we were asked to test some applications, we were given URL to the application that we should test. So sometimes it was a little bit more than that, but most of the times we were given just URL and probably some accounts to begin the pen test process. However, the thing is that usually applications doesn't look like that. Usually they will look like that. So apart from the server itself, you have all the other components. I don't know, like some backend system, some other legacy application which is connected to this one, as well as some other components, like for example, mail server, which sends emails to the end users who register in the application. And what's even worse for the people who perform the pen tests is that it's 2019 now, so the application will look like that. And I'm still probably missing some components because right now everything is in the cloud. So we have AWS Lambda functions, we have some simple email services, and all of these components, which usually, let's say, are not the part of or pen testers are not informed about them. So as you can see, there is this challenge because pen testers are testing these things, so that's usually the information that they get, and the system looks like that. So you have a lot of components which theoretically are in scope and which theoretically may have some impact on the application that you are testing. So there is a question. So if you have this one and that one, who covers the delta? So who is the person who is responsible for testing all the components which were not covered by the initial penetration test? Just a couple of phrases which I encountered a couple of times while, let's say, scoping the pen test, right? So some of them are, let's say, valid ones, so there is a good rationale while people are doing that, but still, only some functionalities are in scope, or email sending is disabled not to flood our people from help desk or whoever, or test environment is isolated from the internet for security reasons, which is probably completely fine. Something is out of scope because it's not ready yet, and the go live is next week or something. So basically, you have all the, let's say, reasons why you cannot test the application from the very beginning to the very end. So maybe integration test will cover all these components which are, let's say, connected or which are somehow dependent from our application. So I Googled a little bit to find some definition of integration testing, so what it covers, what is, let's say, where is the security in the integration testing process. And to be honest, I found nothing. So there's no, like, straight answer to this question. But I found some articles like this one on the left-hand side that, there was some article where people were asking, so who should be responsible for integration testing? Is that developer or is that maybe tester? So the thing is that I believe that if this, let's say, responsibility for this testing process is not clear, it's not going to be done properly. And another topic related to integration testing process. So ideally, if you have some people or some team which performs the integration testing, you should have some people who understand system A, You should have some people who understand system B from both business and technical perspective. And in the end, you should have some pen testers or people from the security who will just point out specific vulnerabilities that might be there. So ideally, it should look like that. However, usually it looks like that. So usually, people who are involved in integration testing have no knowledge about system A and system B. They have just some technical information, how should they connect one to another, and they do not care about the security at all. So the question is, like, taking into account everything that we just mentioned, so there is this question, if we are still exploiting the technology, or if we are exploiting the process? Because if we take into account all of these 5 bullet points which are here, we may, let's say, set up a hypothesis that all of these things which are, let's say, between one system and another, or between various system components, they are not tested. So that was the, let's say, hypothesis or the methodology that I decided to, let's say, to do a little bit of research on that. So I decided to hunt for bug bounties in some web applications, having this mindset in my mind, and it resulted with, let's say, huge profit, because the acceptance rate changed, so it was over 44%. And the thing is that usually the acceptance rate for these bug bounty programs is probably lower than 5%. So I was able to report 27 unique vulnerabilities in 11 months, not wasting, let's say, too much time on that. Just to give you a brief information about the systems which were in scope, these were the publicly available applications of some major vendors, major companies. So yeah, it may look a little bit as this fishy advertisement that he found, like a one weird trick, but yeah, that's true. So speaking about the definition, so that's the definition which basically I created myself for the sake of this presentation. So if we are speaking about vulnerabilities which require at least 2 different system or system components to be exploited successfully, we are speaking about these inter-application vulnerabilities. Okay, so as I mentioned, most of the applications which I'm going to talk about here, I cannot say the names of the companies. However, just you need to take that for granted that these are some major publicly available web pages, which probably all of you know. So we are talking about some huge cybersecurity vendor, huge e-commerce website, huge sports league, so like really big, well-known companies and really well-known applications. Starting with the first example, so story of a desktop application. So there was this application, or there was the bug bounty for this company, which was available for some time already, and you have pretty much the entire domain in scope. So I did a little bit of research in that domain, so looking for some information on Google and so on, and finding some potentially vulnerable endpoints. And to be honest, it was not that easy to find something. However, again, by Googling, I noted that there are certain URLs where the email address is passed in GET request. So I was able to find them just by Googling, going to the last page, and so on, right? And then I went to the application, started to click through the application to actually find this vulnerable endpoint, which generates this GET request, because I was thinking, okay, so maybe there's some vulnerable form. But I wasn't able to find that function or that form which actually generated this vulnerable URL. So I thought that maybe there is some other component or application which actually sends that kind of request to the web server, and so it has to be somewhere. And actually, that was correct, because there was some desktop application which could be downloaded from the web page of that vendor. You just need to register, and you was able to download that application, so thick client desktop application. The thing is that this application, most of the operations, it performed it on the local workstation. However, there were 2 functionalities, so license renewal and forgot password functionalities, which resulted in HTTP request being sent to the web server. So I decided to work a little bit more on that, and I ended up with 2 cross-site scripting with the very basic payload. So I noted that by clicking, renew license, The information that you want to renew license is sent over get parameter with number of different parameters. And just by modifying them with this simple script alert one script payload, I was able to spot the reflected XSS. It was more than that, because obviously this forgot password mechanism was the one which was generating this email address disclosure in GET request. So obviously the indexing protection was not properly configured. So as a result, there was another bug bounty on this one. However, that was just the beginning, because this license renewal mechanism is probably the most important thing here. So for those of you who are somehow familiar with the HTTP protocol and the testing process, so this is more or less how this license renewal process looked like. So you were sending some information, some ID, to the web server, and based on that, he was replying to you with your license number. So you have obvious insecure direct object reference vulnerability. But the thing is that to have this kind of vulnerability, you need to understand if this information which is disclosed to you, so if that license number is actually confidential information. Because the thing is that no one really knows if this license number is confidential. Because if it was license key, that's pretty much obvious that it's confidential information. But what is this license number? No clue. Still, I've sent that report, and the report was revoked or rejected because they mentioned that it's not a sensitive information at all. However, I started to dig a little bit more on this vulnerability and all the, let's say, systems in scope. And actually, I identified that there was some other web page which also, of the same vendor, which also allowed you to renew the licenses. This web page was a little bit different than the previous one, and that's how it looked like. So you had to provide your license ID, and based on the information you provided, it will just give you the web page where you can renew that license, and it also were providing your email address, so email address associated with that license ID to speed up the process. So obviously, if you take to account this information, that you can easily list all the license numbers, and you can take this information, so you can easily associate all the license IDs with email addresses, you have a pretty decent vulnerability, right? Because you can easily dump the entire database of customer emails of that particular vendor. So again, classical inter-application dependency. So we are connecting those between two applications to actually exploit some issue. OK, continuing on that. So this, let's say, license renewal flow, it looks more or less like that. So you were just, you needed to authenticate. You were just sending the information about the about what is your email address. Then you were redirected, and so on and so on. So your email address was sent in GET request in one of the parameters. Then the server responded with redirection to the single sign-on web page, and some information were encoded in base64 string. This base64 string, it couldn't be easily decrypted. So you were able to decode that, but you were not able to get information. However, the last step redirected you, or the server returned the login page with your email. So you may probably know where it's going now. So you could easily replace the email in the first request, and after the server processed it, you would have reflected XSS on SSO web page, so probably one of the critical applications of that particular vendor. So again, bug bounty. So just by, let's say, digging into that this desktop application, which was the beginning of the entire research, I was able to identify 5 vulnerabilities, and 4 of them were like really basic ones, because vulnerabilities like reflected XSS with a basic payload or insecure direct object reference, that's something which probably shouldn't exist anymore in modern applications. Still, that's the story of of this first company, which I was able to, let's say, exploit with that methodology. Going forward, another case of this inter-application vulnerability. So this was a web page of major sports league. They used a number of applications located within different subdomains. So they had a separate application for eStore, for auctions, for subscriptions, for scores, results, whatever. Like plenty of different subdomains. And the, let's say, the payouts for these bug bounties were offered only for the high impact vulnerabilities. So as you can see, SQL injection, remote execution, or persistent XSS. What is more, you could easily see that there is a web application firewall for certain subdomains because the payloads were just blocked. Okay, but there was this thing. So this application supported some kind of registration mechanism, which was somehow similar to single sign-on. The thing is that you could easily register on each of these subdomains, and then you could use these credentials to authenticate to any other web application which was also in scope of this vendor or of this domain. So basically, there was some backend database which was a source of truth, like a single source of truth for all the applications. And the thing is that email address was also published in each of these applications. In most cases, it was encoded, and the filtering mechanism existed during a registration process. But the thing is that input filtering is not easy, especially for the emails, because we need to ask ourselves a question: what actually is a valid format for email address? So you can go to RFCs to find this information. You can go to Wikipedia because it's, let's say, explained there in a more understandable manner. So basically, the thing is, if you can see that from the backside, that special characters are allowed in the local part of the email, and if you put it in the quotes. So basically, this means this kind of email valid from the RFC perspective, and actually a lot of web pages accept this kind of email. So the thing is that if this kind of email is accepted, so if you are able to bypass the filter, and on the other hand, output encoding is not there, you have a huge, huge problem. Why? Because on one of these pages, you are actually able to register yourself with this kind of email address. Cool. The thing is that on some other web page, output encoding was not enabled. So basically, you started the attack from one application just by putting the payload there. This application was, let's say, protected from cross-site scripting. However, the other application, which used the same user database, was not protected from this kind of attacks, so this resulted in the persistent XSS. The thing was that most likely the only impacted person would be the account owner, because that's the only place where you can see the user email address. However, still, they paid bounty for that, so I was happy. Actually, there was more of this kind of XSSs with that vendor, because obviously, as I mentioned, a lot of well-known applications allow you to register accounts with this kind of quoted email address. One of these web pages is PayPal, so you can go to PayPal and register yourself this kind of account. The thing is that PayPal also have some WAF, so if you register yourself this kind of account, you will then get, let's say, you will get error messages coming from PayPal, but you can still use that PayPal, let's say, registered email address to, let's say, start or to initiate the payment process. So that happened for this application. So here is the flow. So I wanted to purchase an item. Then I decided to pay with my PayPal account. And the web server directed me to a PayPal web page. So that's how it looks like. So I was able to, I needed to authenticate with my PayPal account. However, I was able to press that little button, which says cancel and go back to store.example.com. and just not continue the transaction. The thing is that the application had the very long list of all the transactions, successful and unsuccessful ones, with all the details. So just because of, let's say, initiating that transaction with this tricky email address, I was able to perform another persistent access attack. However, in that case, it resulted in no profit, because I think that right after I reported the first vulnerability like that, the vendor decided to change the scope. So they said that persistent cross-site scriptings, which have no clear impact on other users, were excluded from program scope. However, still, again, that's an example of inter-application vulnerabilities. So just by using a number of different systems, we are able to find some pretty easy vulnerabilities which were not encountered before. And quick update on that, because the entire presentation is mentioning the vulnerabilities which were identified last year. This year, even last month, I identified 3 of these cases of this kind of XSSs in email addresses, which were able to, let's say, to impact multiple users because they had some kind of, I don't know, like referral mechanism, so the information about the email address of person who sent you that communication was presented on the web page. So yeah, it ended up with a decent payout. Third huge area, so this is related to emails. So as I mentioned, a lot of applications send emails to their users. You have pretty much every application, every web page sends emails. So I don't know if it's newsletter, registration mechanism, forgot password functionality, referral mechanism, so all of this. They send emails to the end users. And the thing is that these functionalities which send email and which rely on email communications, again, they are often not tested because usually where you have a test environment, people want to disable the email sending functionality, not to create a lot of noise, let's say, in the network. So there was this huge application, e-commerce one, and they have this functionality which allowed one user to chat with the other user, let's say to agree on the payment details and all the stuff like that. So that's the flow, how it looks like. So let's say that Bob wants to chat with Alan. He sends him some message in the web application. Then Alan receives a notification, like an email message coming from this email address. And just by replying to this email, he's able to reply directly to Bob. And Bob sees the entire communication in his profile, so in the web application. The thing is that obviously, if you know what is the email address, so if you know what is the sender and the recipient's temporary email address, you can easily spoof the message content. And that's exactly what happened. So basically, you could identify that you are able to spot the sender's email address in some JSON request. So just by replying or just by sending a message from that email, to that email, you were able to spoof the messages in the communication. So you were just able to create, the communication by yourself. So you could talk one to each other, agree on some contracts, terms or whatever, and then non-repudiation is being affected. More on that, mail content spoofing. So that is quite a well-known attack. So it relies on, let's say, the usage of host header. So just since some of the email content is created based on the value of host header, just by replacing host header, you are able to impact the content of the email messages that are coming to the end users. So this is, let's say, one of the most classic examples. So you have a hacker who will research password of some random user, and he will modify the value of host header. And as a result, the guy will receive an email address coming from email message coming from a completely legit email address, with spoofed domain name in the email body. So that's like a huge class of vulnerabilities related to insecure HTTP headers. It's not just about emails, because I was also able to spoof the content of text message, which was delivered to the end user just by simply modifying these host headers. So you can modify the host header, you can try to substitute or to add another header, which is X-forwarded host, or you can come up with some more fancy headers like XAKMI original URL. So basically the rule is simple: the more fancy header you have, the bigger the chance of payout is. Third case related to email vulnerabilities. So as you can probably imagine, spidering, the classical spidering, doesn't work anymore for the URLs which are sent in email messages. So basically, as I mentioned, a lot of applications send different things in mail body. So what I usually do is I will put my email address and register myself to everything that I can register for. So all the things like subscribe, unsubscribe, refer someone, refer a friend, I don't know, all of these things, newsletters. So you can just register yourself. You will get some kind of email message from that service, and then you can pretty much use Active Scanner or some other feature on that just to find vulnerabilities within, right? And again, just by doing that, so just by getting these emails and then following the links in that and putting some really basic payloads, I was able to identify like multiple vulnerabilities like reflected cross-site scripting or insecure direct object reference. Okay, going to the takeaway section. So if you're a bug bounty hunter or pen tester, some quick wins for you. So you can go to your favorite web page, try to register yourself with this kind of email. If you are successful, you can go to my profile section or some similar thing in the application. And yeah, there is a huge chance that you will spot a persistent cross-site scripting. Second thing, if you have a web application which has email sending capabilities, you can just subscribe to all the newsletters, notifications, promotions, gift cards, whatever, and look for vulnerabilities there. And the third thing, which I already mentioned, is just by simply modifying the value of host headers, you can spoof the email messages or the text messages, what is still a valid, finding valid vulnerability. Now, how to avoid these issues, and that's probably something which is, it's very easy to talk about that, but it's much harder to execute that in, let's say, real life. So some advice which I can give, so during the testing process, you should analyze all the application interfaces. So you should probably know what are the other application components which may affect the original application, and try to perform some kind of security analysis of them. Make sure that integration test covers security aspects. Again, it's quite easy to tell, maybe harder to achieve. But what you can do for sure is use defense in-depth approach. So if you can use both input filtering and output encoding, do that. Maybe you can reduce the attack surface. And obviously make sure that your test environment is as similar to prod as possible. So basically, if on prod environment you are, I don't know, sending emails, or just you have some load balancer or web application firewall before that, probably it would be a good idea to have the same configuration in the test environment. Some advanced things to consider. So first of all, make sure that your security team understands the business process and understands what sets of data are actually processed by the application. Make sure that your security team is aware of all the interfaces and has a good knowledge about the entire tested ecosystem. What else? Google dorking. So that's a nice activity which probably you can perform. So just the very basic thing is just type the domain where the application is located, go to the last page of Google search, and you will probably spot some web pages like which are not used anymore, or some web pages with some strange parameters. Third thing is probably the hardest one. So if there are some cross-system data dependencies, you can analyze that, but to be honest, it will take a lot of effort, and this effort will be not just on the security team, but also on the business team who actually manages the application. More thoughts on that? I published some, let's say, some data, some statistics of the entire research that I took. If you want to find more about that, you can go to medium.com, just type this inter-application vulnerabilities, and you will find the article with more detailed information on the numbers, how much vulnerabilities of each, let's say, in each category I was able to identify using this kind of methodology. So yeah, that's it from my side. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, I will be happy to answer. Yes, please. Sorry, I can't hear anything because of this machine.
Could you mention the bounties that you got awarded for the bounties in third and second case?
Again, could you repeat?
You didn't mention the bounties in your first two examples. Could you mention them?
What do you mean, the payout?
Yeah, the payout, I mean.
Okay, so the payout for this, usually for insecure direct object reference, it depends from one, let's say, web page to another, but in that case, it was around $1,000.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Go ahead. Do you have a mic?
Very nice presentation, thank you. I have one question. So, what is your plan for the next bug bounties? Will you do the same things, or do you plan to expand your testing methodology?
I think I will stick to that approach, because I believe that using that approach and extending this methodology, let's say, to more advanced vulnerabilities will probably bring even more results.
Thank you.
Yes.
How about mobile apps? Have you found any inter-application vulnerabilities with mobile apps?
Yes, the thing is that I'm not working on mobile apps a lot, but I believe that pretty much same concepts might be used here. So for example, if you can initiate some process using your mobile app and complete that using your web application, it's probably the very same case. So maybe input filtering is not there on the mobile, and maybe output encoding is not in web. So I believe that the concept is still the same, but let's say the vector is a little bit different.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.